Hey guys, Slynk here with another video. So last weekend, I was lucky enough to be invited by Ableton to attend Ableton Loop, which is pretty cool. It's an annual summit for music makers. It's basically Comic-Con, but for Ableton nerds. Just a bunch of nerds getting together, talking about crazy stuff. There was different presentations and performances and interactive little workshops and stuff. It was amazing. They usually hold it in Berlin, but this year it was in Hollywood, LA. Hollywood. And it's not too far from Vancouver, so I booked an Airbnb for the weekend and jumped on a plane and headed down to LA. But yeah, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I'd never been to an Ableton Loop before, and I hadn't seen too many videos from previous years. I remember seeing an Adam Neely video, which was like really amazing. Kind of mind-blowing actually. I woke up early, headed down to the Montalban theater to get my wristband.
Hey! Oh my god! Slynk!
How's it going?
Excuse me. Oh, I'm such a fan. I finally get to meet this guy. Holy cow. I'm Abed. I go by Nebulae on the user forums. I'm on CT and all that, but
cool.
I've been promoting your stuff in all of the user groups and whatnot for many years. Your stuff is so good. It's so good. I need to take a picture with you here.
Yeah,
Take
right.
a selfie with Slynk.
This pretty much sums up my entire experience at Ableton Loop. Lots and lots of people coming up to me, talking about my YouTube channel and saying like, oh, thanks, you taught me so much. It was really nice. It made me feel welcome and kind of a part of the Ableton community. So everyone got a little swag bag, come in this cool tote with the Loop logo on it. And there was a few things inside. It was just a blank notepad for you to take notes if you were interested in writing down notes, a couple of Ableton pencils, a schedule, of course, so you know what's happening when, a little magazine if you've got some downtime, you just want to chill and read something, Ableton name tag sticker, $5 off at Amoeba Music, and also inside the bag, there was this record, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what's on the record. Freddie Jackson, Rock Me Tonight. Anyway, it turns out that it's just a random record from the bargain bin at Amoeba Records. So I've never heard of that record before. I'll listen to it later, but I just thought it was a cool idea as like an icebreaker. You know, everyone's chilling, waiting for the event to start, and people are like, oh, what record did you get? And what kind of music you listen to? You know, it was like a conversation starter. It was a cool idea. So we all funneled into the main theater to hear the welcome address by Dennis. And he had some advice for all the Ableton Loop newbies that were in the room, which included me. He basically said that, you know, there's plenty of presentations and workshops to attend, but the real magic of Ableton Loop is just talking to each other. It really set the tone for the whole weekend. So I was ready to check out some crazy stuff. I went over to the iVibe Brickbox to the Maker Zone, where Ricky Graham and Naomi Mitchell were designing and building modular gear with a soldering iron and electronic components, and they were just plugging them right in and adding to the sound. And in the room there was a speaker in each corner, and the modular gear was panning stuff all around your head. It was pretty nutty. And I don't have any experience with modular gear, so it was kind of cool to be outside of my comfort zone. And Crazy Baldhead did a little demo on his foot pedal MIDI controller that interacts with Max for Live and the Ableton Looper. You can do a ton of stuff with just these 5 buttons, but I think the coolest thing was that you can record to any looper on any channel in your Ableton project. He's got a Kickstarter if you want to check out more about it. Pretty interesting stuff.
This one is available, there's a version that's available on the Kickstarter page for free.
So I didn't get footage of everything, but I remember Afro DJ Mac gave a short presentation about live recordings. And I didn't know this, but he's actually a high school teacher by day. And he was telling a story about how he was supervising a detention, and this like kid who was like full of energy and bored ended up folding this pop can into this like crumpled mess. And when he like yelled in it or blew into it or something, it made this horrible like rattling, screeching sound. Rather than letting that get under his skin, he took a audio sample of it with his phone and pitched it down, and it ended up sounding like this cool textured pad sound. And he wrote this awesome chill track and played it for us. It was just really interesting. His main message with the presentation was that you don't always need your expensive field recorder or a perfect studio environment to record usable sounds for your productions, you know? And it's often like when you get back to the studio and listen to these impromptu recordings that you realize, hey, it's the low quality and it's the the realness of the sound that gives it character and makes it unique. It's better than not recording it at all, right? So I just thought that was really inspirational for me, because I'm often just chilling in my studio and tweaking knobs and synths and stuff, and I never record any sounds, so it was a good presentation. So with impromptu recordings in the back of my mind, I was invited into a jam session with Essa Williams, and there was just a bunch of gear on the table for anyone to sit down and play with. It was pretty fun. So the next day, I caught this awesome panel with Laura Escudé, Patrice Rushen, and Fote about how sometimes things can go wrong on stage. And they all sort of shared some pretty embarrassing stories about things that went bad on stage, some horrible mistakes, and it was all very entertaining. But they were really hammering home the importance of just being prepared for the unexpected. Things go wrong all the time. And sometimes when you're at an intimate club, the crowd's a little bit more forgiving and they'll just be like, don't worry, we love you, take your time and reset your laptop or whatever. But when you're on live TV or something a little bit more high stakes, there's no room for error. So you just have to be prepared. You've got to build in redundancy, have a spare laptop, that kind of thing. But yeah, it reminded me of this time at Motion Notion a few years back. Our whole crew was on stage and we were watching Sticky Buds perform his set. We were getting hyped for Nick Taylor's set, who was up next. And he put on his first track, and when the drop hit, we all just did this synchronized jump move. I guess the stage was a little bit bendy because Nick Taylor's laptop just went straight out of the laptop stand and just crash landed on the floor. Horrible, distorted, garbling sound. It was kind of hilarious, but also a little bit nerve-wracking, oh my God. Sticky Buds was smart enough to still have his gear plugged in. He grabbed the microphone and said something like, "What up, Motion Nation?" He played a couple more songs while Nick Taylor reset his laptop. But yeah, really anything can happen on stage and you just got to be ready to take action. The next panel I saw was with Fote, and he was kind of deconstructing and giving us an insight into one of his unreleased tracks. It was interesting because going back to the Afro DJ Mac presentation about live recordings, Fote took some of his friends into a bunker and it was really echoey and spooky in there, and they recorded a bunch of vocals, and he used a loop from that recording to use as a springboard to build the rest of his track. And it was interesting to take a look inside of his Ableton project. So on the first day of Ableton Loop, they tweeted out a production challenge with a download link to a single sample, and the idea was to just make and submit a track using that sample in whatever creative way you saw fit. Then the next day, Andrew Huang, Ebony Smith, and Nick Weiss participated in the challenge themselves, and we got to see how they use the sample and some interesting production techniques. And then we all listened to 10 of the most interesting submissions out of something like 800 submissions. It was pretty cool. And one of the submissions was actually from two people that were attending Ableton Loop, a producer and a vocalist that had never met before, and they ended up spending all night in a hotel room working on their submission, and it was pretty cool. Their track was an absolute banger. So after an amazing performance by Richard Devine on the rooftop of the Montalban Theatre, I was on my way home and it's like 10 p.m. I thought I'd pop into East West Studios and see what's going on. And if you don't know anything about East West Studios, this place has got a lot of history. The TV theme for MASH was recorded in Studio One, and Marvin Gaye recorded Let's Get It On in Studio One as well. Michael Jackson recorded some of his album from Thriller, and he recorded Dangerous in Studio One. AC/DC recorded Ball Breaker in Studio 2. This place is so epic. Weezer recorded their album Weezer, the Green Album, in Studio 2. Rage Against the Machine recorded Renegades in Studio 2 as well. And then more recently, music for the motion picture Iron Man 2, Mad Men, the TV series, and the soundtrack for 50 Shades of Grey and a bunch of other TV shows was recorded in East West Studios. Justin Timberlake recorded the 2020 Experience in Studio 1. Even Justin Bieber recorded Purpose in Studio 5. Not cool enough for Studio 1, Justin Bieber? Man, it's like being in a part of history. It was crazy. Anyway, I cruised down the halls and stumbled upon this impromptu jam session that was happening.
I've been slowing down past few years.
What kind of stuff?
Some serious jams going on back there.
Yeah.
It's cool. So for the last day of Ableton Loop, I thought I'd try and spend a little bit more time at East West Studios. It really had a nice vibe. I ended up catching this great panel about using computers and artificial intelligence as a collaborative partner. It was super interesting, and Lucky Dragons spoke a little bit about their journey into machine learning, some of their theories and experiments. And Yacht also did a presentation on how they used artificial intelligence to write an entire song, including drums, melody, and even lyrics. It sounded pretty good. But the more interesting part of the presentation for me was these two dudes from a Google project called Magenta, and they demonstrated Magenta Studio, which is a collection of artificial intelligent MIDI plugins for Ableton. And I mean, this really needs an entire video to explain everything, but I'll show you a little clip.
So let's see how this actually works in Ableton now. You open up the Groovy plugin, you get your quantized drum beat. So it's nice, but it's pretty stiff, right? We can hit the generate button here. And now here's the Groovy version. So it's the same underlying beat, but now you can see at the bottom there's velocities applied. Now a little funky bass, this kind of but there's velocities applied, there's some offsets. And then we can switch back to the original, just to hear how different it sounds. Yeah. Yeah.
I bumped into this dude from Teenage Engineering, and he showed me their newest piece of hardware called the OPZ, which is a super cool little pocket-sized 16-track sequencer and synthesizer. You can also sequence visuals by triggering lights and photos. It's USB-C, it's got a built-in accelerometer and a user-replaceable battery, which is really nice. And it also has Bluetooth, allowing you to connect it to your phone, and then you can use the app to do even more tinkering and tweaking. So it comes like built with sounds, right?
Yeah.
And you can add your own sounds?
Yes, of course.
It's an amazing piece of hardware in such a small package. It kind of looks like a toy, but this thing is a beast, man. Go and check out their website, teenageengineering.com. Oh, I didn't realize there's a button down there.
Yeah, that's a pitch bend.
Pitch bend?
Yeah.
No way. I found my buddy Yakov, the CEO of Mixed in Key and Captain Plugins, outside of East West Studios as well. And you guys remember that video I did a while back about Odyssey, the software that kind of generates chord progressions and melodies to help you write a song? Well, Captain Plugins is a new set of VSTs, which you can use directly in your DAW. It's very similar to Odyssey, except it's just a little bit more convenient and split up into like 3 or 4 plugins. I'll probably end up doing a video about those plugins in the future. But anyway, he bought me lunch and we kind of just nerded out talking about artificial intelligence and VST development, and it was the perfect segue from the last panel about AI to the next panel that I was planning on catching with Steve Duda. So Steve Duda gave us a very concise and entertaining rundown of his journey from being a producer and becoming a software developer. He basically started as a producer, obviously, and ended up having some ideas for plugins and VSTs that he would like to use himself. And he farmed some of those ideas out to developers, and then they would develop them, and some of them became actual fully fledged products, namely BFD, which is a sample-based drum sequencer. Eventually, he got sick of farming out and waiting for developers to develop and decided to give it a try himself. And he had absolutely no idea what he was doing, but he downloaded some SDKs from the Steinberg website, and he said he spent like 6 hours trying to compile a simple bit crusher, basically using trial and error and just Googling stuff. And eventually he got it to work, and he really caught a bug for development. And then he went on to explain in detail more about his journey developing Serum and how he worked with mathematicians and graphic designers. It was super interesting. But towards the end of his presentation, he offered a little piece of advice.
If music is your main motivation, if you really or you consider yourself a musician and that's the career you like, and if you're thinking, hey, maybe if I did software development, I could make my own VSTs for my own music, I would recommend against that.
Right.
Because one thing I always wondered as a user, before I had opened up anything C or get the VST SDK and all that, I always wondered, I was like, how come these guys making these plugins aren't making the most insane music there is? Like, how come these guys aren't making the most awesome stuff? Because they're obviously smart. They probably have tools that none of us have, right? They could have little secret weapons. And how come they're not making the most insane music? And then I realized, of course, once I start programming, is your brain really just can't handle both. As soon as you are in the development mindset and you bring that plugin into your DAW and you put a little riff in, then you're like, oh, that doesn't work. Right, or you're like, oh, I need to add that. There's just, you can't like just work on music. So even if you're thinking about coding, you're like, well, okay, I'm not thinking of being a musician, Steve. I actually think that might be an interesting career. Even in that sense, I would say, well, don't start with the C++, because I didn't either. There's a background to my history I think that's worth mentioning, which is that I worked on a Nine Inch Nails record for 2 years, for instance, and Trent gave me free run to like, hey Steve, why don't you spend the next month with Reactor and do nothing but make some weird fucked up modules for me? I'm like, okay, awesome. And a month in Reactor. Who gets to do that in real life? Like, when you get to like 18 hours a day, like sit there with a Reactor. And so I did that for a month, and I learned Reactor really well. And so I am able to use Reactor for prototyping, or I'm able to look to Reactor modules if I'm looking for a solution for a certain type of DSP or something like that.
I found this part to be super interesting and inspiring because I've always wanted to learn more about Max for Live. You know, I've got some ideas for plugins that I would like to create. So I think this is really the kick in the butt that I needed to finally get started with Max for Live and expand my knowledge of DSP. And who knows, maybe eventually I'll get to a point where I'm able to comfortably prototype ideas for plugins in Max for Live, and maybe I'll take a stab at converting that idea into a fully fledged VST of my own. It's a very inspiring and super entertaining presentation. Unfortunately, the Steve Duda presentation was on at the same time as the Melodics workshop, which I really wanted to check out. So I missed Amp Live's performance, but I popped in and got to talk to him about his very interesting looking MPC 2000, which is not actually an MPC 2000 because he completely ripped the guts out of it and replaced it with a livid instrument brain and then attached some arcade style buttons. It looks pretty cool. I hadn't heard of Livid Instruments before, but I checked out their website and they've got some pretty fun looking kits that you can use to build basically any kind of MIDI controller that you want.
So, absolutely.
Looks like it's had a lot of love.
Yeah, I kind of wanted it ugly though, honestly.
Yeah, no, it's sweet. It's sweet. Binkbeats performed a few songs for us and then took us through all the gear that he uses on stage. It's an insane amount of gear. He even has a little slinky, which is pretty cool. And everything has contact mics attached to it, and there's mics everywhere. It must be insane to set that stuff up. He took us through his Ableton project.
By this plugin,
And this is the big secret. It's a Max for Live plugin, and with this plugin I control all the recording. Because mainly I record clips. And all the clips, they only get recorded in this upper scene here. It's called samples. So you see the little squares here. So all the recording happens here, even if I'm all the way down here or wherever. All the recording happens on the top.
A lot of the stuff that was going on in his project kind of went over my head, but from what I could gather, he had a lot of blank clips in session view with automation inside of those clips to trigger and arm the recording on certain channels. There was a bunch of other crazy stuff happening. I'm not even sure how to explain it. He did mention that although it looks like everything he's doing on stage seems very off the cuff and it kind of looks like he's improvising, his songs are extremely calculated and there really isn't any room for error. Ableton Loop was a great time. I'm stoked to be able to share my experience with you in this video. Hopefully you learned something new or found something interesting in the video that sparks some kind of inspiration for you. I know the whole experience for me was very inspirational and I learned a ton of new stuff. I'm really looking forward to next year's Ableton Loop. Thanks for watching. Peace.